Welcome to today's live chapter reading of Wild Desire by Toya Richardson. Mila parked up at a viewing spot and took time to gaze out over the beautiful land before her. She leaned against the side of her car, inhaling a deep breath of invigorating country air. A refreshing change from the smog and pollution which surrounded the city. Such a long time since she'd been home. Closing her eyes, she reflected on why she'd left there without a backwards glance. Recent recurring dreams and nightmares of this place urged her to return, a compulsion she could no longer deny. This time, she wouldn't be the butt of everyone's jokes. She was stronger now and more resolute. As soon as her parents had passed, she'd taken off. They died in a forest fire, trying to save some of the animals. Part of her suspected foul play. Some of the village boys used to hunt in the deeper parts of the forest, which was illegal, and her father warned them off almost constantly. She reflected on one of the older teens, Drake Scott, threatening him at their home. "Old man, you don't realize who you're messing with. Come after us again and you'll be sorry. My dad will make you pay." Tears coursed down her cheeks at the memory. It was soon after Drake's veiled threat that her parents had died. The boy was her biggest tormentor all through her school years. No one had stood up for her. No one. Everyone feared him and his family name. After her parents' deaths, he'd accosted her in the street, warning her she'd meet the same fate if she didn't do as he said. That day, she'd endured too much and retaliated to his bullying. She'd slapped him. Hard. The shock in his eyes was palpable. "You better run, little girl, before something really does happen to you." Soon after, she packed what few belongings she possessed, locked up the family home, and driven off in the middle of the night. Even though she vowed never to return, there was a drive inside her to come back. It was crazy because this place had caused her so much heartache, but the forest had also been her friend, and she'd missed it so much. Memories of her recent dreams tormented her, chased by monsters, human and otherworldly, through the deepest depths of the forest. Something about the dreams compelled her to do some research on the internet. There were rumors on some websites she'd visited of strange beasts spotted in the deeper parts of the forests. Hikers had disappeared, too, never to be found again. They were mostly posted by conspiracy theory nuts. It had called to her, though, and was part of the reason she'd returned, along with the dreams. Musing turned to Drake's father, Luther Scott, who was a big deal in the chemical industry. There were hints he was experimenting with bioweapons, illegally, although the claims could never be substantiated. One of the conspiracy nuts, known only as Danger Man, posted online that he was certain Scott Tech was using animals and biotechnology to produce the ultimate weapon, an unstoppable soldier. This theory was debunked. Rumor had it that Danger Man was now in hiding. Maybe he'd gotten too close to the truth after all. They'd shared many online conversations about what could be happening in the forest and at Scott Tech. Once they'd even met up. The meeting was far away from where either of them lived. He'd explained it would be safer for them. They haven't even exchanged their real identities. She'd gone by the name of Wild Thing. He'd informed her he intended to check out the forest for himself. Mila begged him not to. Something warned her this wouldn't go well for him. Danger Man had assured her he would be safe. That was the last time she heard from him. Mila shook her thoughts away. After she left her home, she was determined to make something of herself. People used to call her strange because she preferred to take off into the solitude of the forest rather than hang out with the other kids. The animals were, and always had been, her friends. Her only friends. Having red hair and strange-colored eyes hadn't helped either. They were a curious mix of green, hazel, and silver. And so, from an early age, she'd been bullied. Repeatedly. Her parents always assured her she was special, that she would find her true purpose in life when she became a woman. Mila laughed without humor. At the age of 25, she still wasn't positive what that purpose was. Although her new job role excited her. As a forest ranger, her skills and experience of living in this area would be a great asset. Plus, she wouldn't have to mix with others too much, only people who showed an interest in the outdoors. Mother Nature would be her friend once more. Hopping back into her car, she breathed deeply to calm her nerves and headed for her family home. At least she could bypass the main village and take the scenic route along the edge of the forest. Her spirits began to soar. The sun glinted off the leaves on the trees, covering them in a golden glow. She wound the window right down so she could feel the warmth and soft breeze on her skin. It was late spring, when nature was full of life and promise. Something lay in the middle of the road up ahead. Mila stopped the car and got out. When she drew closer, she could see it was a small red deer, a calf with little white spots covering its back. Pretty little thing. It let out a soft snore, a sound which meant it was alarmed. She approached the frightened animal with caution. "It's okay, sweetie. I won't hurt you." She advanced toward the animal with slow movements. It attempted to get up, but couldn't. Mila slowly edged closer and knelt on the ground beside it. Instead of shying away from her hand, it nudged her. This was strange behavior. It looked up at her with its huge brown eyes. She may have been going crazy, but it was almost as though it was trying to communicate with her. It allowed her to check it over. There was no visible signs of injuries such as cuts or breaks. She surmised the animal was exhausted and a little dehydrated. "Hang on, I'll fetch some water for you." Mila sprinted back to her car and grabbed a bottle of water. Cupping her hand in front of its mouth, she poured some water into her palm. The calf drank greedily until the bottle was almost empty. She stroked its coat with gentle reassurance. Rustling from the undergrowth, and a loud bellow drew her attention away from it. It was the sound of a stag. She turned to see the magnificent beast watching her, its brown eyes fixed to hers. There was a kind of intelligence and understanding in their depths. The calf rose on unsteady legs and headed over to the stunning animal. This was such a weird behavior for a red deer. The stag licked at the calf's furs. This had to be a first. In this distance, she could hear men's voices. They were getting ever closer, sounding loud and excited. "Get back in your car and drive. It's not safe for you out here on your own." "What the?" Mila spun around, expecting to see someone behind her, but there was no one. Maybe she was going crazy. She reminded herself that she'd been traveling for hours. It was obviously due to lack of sleep. Either that, or she was turning into Dr. Dolittle and the stag had spoken. A nervous laugh escaped her just as the stag ran inside the cover of the forest with the calf. Loud crashing sounds came ever closer to her. Warning bells and fears kicked in and she hurried back to her car. The need to be away before the voices got any closer was almost a compulsion. "It's around here somewhere. We've been chasing it for ages. Fresh venison for dinner." Loud cheers rang out. Mila didn't stop to hear any more and started up her car, desperate to be away from the scene. As she headed closer to her family home, she remembered the voice of the man who'd called out from the undergrowth. Drake Scott. So, he hadn't changed. And as for the voice in her head, definitely sleep deprivation. Elias headed back to his cottage in the heart of the forest where no one dared go. Patrolling this area was becoming a full-time responsibility. Too many of his kind had been killed and butchered by humans, especially by Jake and his friends. And as for the ones who hadn't been killed, he shuddered, not even daring to contemplate their fate at the hands of Luther, Drake's father. If only he could utilize the portal to take everyone to safety, to a place where they could all live together in peace and harmony. This wouldn't happen for the foreseeable future. All of his kind had a duty to ensure the animals and humans were safe. So much needed to be done first, including the destruction of Luther Scott's research facility, and the growing desire to find a mate, a woman to soothe his soul. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed heavily with frustration. For many long years, he'd searched tirelessly for his mate, someone to share his life with, a woman to heal the ache in his heart. After centuries of trying, he'd yet to find her. And then he'd witnessed the caring and compassion of the red-headed woman with the calf. Something had stirred inside his tired and lonely heart. He was shocked when he'd warned her to flee from the men, even more surprised when she'd heard his warning. Drake and his companions would have raped and killed her if they'd discovered her. A loud rumble filled the room. It was a growl coming from him, almost as though he was staking his claim to the woman. Maybe it was her. Perhaps she was his mate. Elias poured some coffee in a mug and sat outside the cottage. He drank deeply, allowing the warmth of the liquid to relax him. Closing his eyes, all he could see was the stunning redhead and hear her gentle, compassionate words and actions towards the calf. His heart burned with some strange sensation. Hey, bro. He watched his brother and sister-in-law stroll in his direction. Mathis was 10 years his junior, with rugged good looks and a winning smile. His wife, Lily, was beautiful and looked even more stunning with her rounded belly. A smile split his lips as he witnessed them exchange a loving glance. Hey, guys. Lily, that baby must be due to come out soon, he indicated to her tummy. She approached and slapped him playfully on his arm. Are you trying to say I'm getting fatter, Elias? He held up his hands in surrender. I wouldn't dare. Elias grabbed her in a loving hug and then held her at arm's length. You look beautiful, radiant. Now that's a much better response. Then she looked up at him again, studying him with wise blue eyes. She put her hand to her mouth. Lily, what's wrong, baby? Mathis said with concern. You've seen her, haven't you? Lily's voice was hardly more than a whisper. Elias tipped his head back, drawing in a deep breath, and then looked back at Lily. Yes. Mila drove along the rough track to park outside the front of her childhood home. It had been well cared for in her absence. A couple living in a neighboring village, Mary and Jim, who were close family friends, had tended to it while she'd been away. She'd offered to reimburse them, but they refused payment. Wildflowers grew in abundance around the property, so much prettier than cultivated flowers. Their sweet fragrance wafted up to her, as if in greeting. She reflected on Mary's parting words to her. Your parents were there for us in times of need, and whatever you may think now, you will be back. The forest needs you. It confused her at the time, and she hadn't thought to quiz her about the meaning. When she was settled in, she'd do just that. There were so many unanswered questions surrounding her parents' deaths. She put the key in the lock and was shocked when she heard a loud sigh emanating from the trees around her. The wind picked up, and even the wildflowers bowed their heads under its power. Welcome home, Mila. Her head spun, and she held onto the doorframe for support. Although just a whisper, it was filled with power and almost desperation. Then it was gone, leaving Mila to wonder if she was going out of her mind. First the stag, and now this. Definitely lack of sleep, she reaffirmed. Perhaps coming back here was a mistake.